Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
This is True Crime Cast. I am Jamie, sitting across from John. What's happening?
What's happening is it feels amazing outside.
Yeah.
It's still football season. I feel like I could run through a brick wall right now and not even slow down. That's what's happening.
I don't advise it. You might be able to, but getting back on your feet would be a problem.
Yeah. Who said I'll even leave my feet?
I mean,
Physics.
you're going to lay down at some point. I've seen you watch a movie. You fall asleep instantly.
Yeah. I had to go to the sleep doctor this week and take that survey of if you're sitting down on the couch watching a movie, are you going to fall asleep? And I will be like, yeah. Who doesn't?
Most people don't.
That's fair enough. People without sleep apnea, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, you guys didn't tune in to hear my sob story. So how are you doing, Jamie?
Yeah, it's somebody else's sad story, right? Like that's what we do. We don't tell a lot of happy stories. Yeah. Although last week with Mag Bailey, sorry, I've been watching Justified still. Mag Bailey was a lot of fun for me.
It was a great episode, and I don't know. I was a little surprised no one emailed us to say, how could we condone a bootlegger, but we haven't got those. So I mean, if you sent it, it didn't come through because it may have happened. We did get a new 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts. This comes from Allie V16. I've been listening to this podcast since 2018 when I made my long drives from Columbus to Cleveland, and it's been my favorite show ever since. I now listen on my way to and from work, and the true crime to-goes are perfect for my shorter drives around town. I'd love for you guys to cover the case of Carnell Sledge and Catherine Brown. It's been unsolved for 5 years. Thank you both for all your hard work that you put into making these awesome episodes. Allie, that is very, very kind of you, and I will right now go and put that on our list. I appreciate that. That's awesome. Jamie, over on Patreon, we had a new member that subscribed right before we walked into the studio, and that is Luca. Luca, thank you so much. You became a $3 member, and you took advantage of the annual discount when you sign up for a full year, save 15%. So Luca and everyone else on Patreon, we appreciate it. We dropped an episode last Tuesday and it was awesome. So go check it out.
Absolutely. And we've got a good one here today. This one has been on the news a lot lately. So we wanted to go ahead and cover it kind of how, now that it's hot, but it's becoming more and more common, and I have a lot of questions about how much more we're going to see this happen. A situation where somebody finds out years later something critical about their identity.
All right. Well, with that being said, why don't you get the ball rolling?
We're going to start in February of 1951. That's when 6-year-old Luis Armando Albino was playing with his older brother Roger at an Oakland, California park. You have one kid named Armando Albino, and you have one named Roger.
I mean, is that really how the last name? Because I'm John Albino because I'm really white. And then, a brother named Roger.
That's interesting. A woman approached Luis and, speaking to him in Spanish, promised to buy him candy. Now, this is the stereotypical child abduction, right? You pull up, you invite them to get some candy. He followed her away from the park and left Roger behind. And that moment marked the beginning of a family's nightmare. Luis was abducted, and his family would spend over 70 years searching for him.
The Albino family had moved from Puerto Rico to Oakland just a year before this kidnapping. The mother, Antonia, was devastated by the loss of her son. She spent years visiting the police missing persons bureau. She was desperate for any information about her child. Initially, her visits were daily, but as the months turned to years, they would become less and less frequent. They would become weekly and then monthly, and eventually just once per year. she never stopped believing that her son was alive, but she was losing hope in the police department's ability to find him.
Yeah, and this is terrifying as a parent. I've, of course, done the stereotypical thing of misplaced my kid in a store or a mall, and those few moments are just absolutely terrifying. Can you imagine living that for 70 years?
I've been on the opposite side of that. I was lost in a zoo one time as like a 4 or 5 year old, and I remember the panic, just the feeling of, I don't know anything that I could even compare it to, but that was when I was a kid. As a parent, my God, man, I can't imagine what that would feel like.
Despite extensive searches involving local police, the FBI, they even got some soldiers from the local army base to help out, Lewis was never found. In the 1950s, law enforcement faced significant challenges. There were no Amber Alerts at this time. We actually covered the case where Amber Alerts started happening because of that kidnapping. There were no advanced surveillance systems. We didn't have cameras on every corner. We didn't have trackers. People used cash. Public awareness was pretty limited. We didn't have the internet. People would see things in newspapers mostly, occasionally maybe on local television, but it wasn't hardly a nationwide, let alone worldwide effort. Authorities were left to rely on the tight community around Oakland, and despite their best efforts, the trail for Lewis went cold. Antonia's unwielding hope became a hallmark of the family's life. Even as the years passed, the thought of Lewis never disappeared, and kudos to her. I don't want to know how I would react in this situation, but holding on to that hope over time would, I don't know. That's a lot of strength right there.
I mean, it's a parent's worst nightmare is losing your child, whether that's by a kidnapping or death. And I can't imagine it's a pain that ever leaves you. I would imagine that you have to go through each day with, that kind of weight on your shoulders. I don't think it's ever going to get easier.
And everything's a reminder, everything you look at.
And, sorry to go off here, but I mean, they say time cures all wounds, but I would dare say that's a gaping wound that would never be healed. I think that's one that's going to be taken to the grave with you.
Absolutely.
So awful. Roger, who was the last person to see Lewis in the family, was haunted by his brother's abduction, and he lived with the memory of that fateful day, always wondering what had happened. And as the years progressed, the family made multiple trips back to Puerto Rico because they were convinced that Lewis might have been taken there, but every time they went, their searches always yielded nothing. The pain of uncertainty was compounded by the lack of closure that they would, receive because there's none of it. Lewis's disappearance became a wound that never healed, and there was always that lingering question that loomed over this family for decades. I mean, multiple decades.
It's not even just where is he and who's he with. I mean, is he alive or not? Is he safe or not? Is he happy or not if he is alive? Just so many questions you have in your head, and I think some people tend to focus on worst case scenario, and some people are able to maintain that hope, but those awful thoughts have to live pretty rent free in your head. Now we're going to jump ahead a little bit all the way to 2020, the year the world fell apart, right? Alita Aliquin, who is Lewis's niece, took an online DNA test. This is something everybody's doing, 23andMe, lots of others, what have you. She had grown up hearing about her missing uncle, obviously didn't really know him. She wasn't born when he disappeared. But like many families, she had no real hope, at least, of finding him. This was a story that she was just going to.
And this was 70 years ago at that point,
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's insane.
70 years. The DNA test revealed, obviously she's an adult at this point, by the way, not a little girl. The DNA test revealed that she had a 22% match with a man that she didn't know, she had never met, and she had never even heard of. He was actually living on the East Coast, but of course she still lived out west. Initially, she didn't know what to make of it. Could this just be some kind of relative from infidelity or some kind of misreading of the data? She tried to contact the man, but really didn't have any luck. It took her years before she finally watched a documentary about cold cases that had been solved by DNA, and she felt compelled to dive back in to her uncle's case and to see if that DNA match could possibly have anything to do with Luis.
Her determination led her to just really delve into the family's old records and newspaper archives. She began to connect the dots between her DNA match and her missing uncle. In 2024, she brought the information to the Oakland Police Department. Investigators recognized the potential significance of her findings, and they actually reopened the case. And kudos to them. This was something that happened 70 years ago. And while there's probably not a statute of limitations on kidnapping, it was so long ago and maybe a stretch, but now this DNA evidence is kind of stuff that you can look at and say conclusively, all right, this might be something here. The ability to use genealogy sites to trace family connections has become a powerful tool in law enforcement, especially in cold cases. The advancements in DNA testing have led to countless reunions, bringing closure to families like this one. And at a time when they thought all hope was gone and they were never going to see their loved ones again.
Yeah, the police department also, not only is it a cold, old case that they're going to be spending their time on, but there are new pressing cases going on. So it's kudos to them, like you said, for taking the time to dig into this. And you're right, there is no state in America that has a statute of limitations on kidnapping, because that's a crime that obviously can last decades and decades. The Oakland Police Department started the process of tracking down Luis, conducting DNA comparisons with his surviving siblings and other people connected to him out east. They were finally able to reach him on the East Coast, and investigators conducted a DNA test to confirm his identity. The results revealed that Luis was indeed the boy who had been taken from the park 73 years earlier. The emotional weight of this revelation was immense. Alita and her mom were overcome with joy. "We found him," they exclaimed, of course, and their long search had come to a heartwarming conclusion.
In June of 2024, the FBI and Oakland police arranged for Luis to return to California for a reunion with his family. This was a moment that everyone had anticipated for over 70 years. Luis met his niece, Alita, his sister, and I think most importantly, his older brother, Roger, the one who was the last person to see him when this tragedy hit. And this was, I wish I could have been in the room just to see everyone's faces and the response to this. The two brothers shared a very long, heartfelt hug. They talked about their lives and their experiences and the moments that had shaped them over the decades. This reunion was bittersweet, particularly for Roger, who had spent his life grappling with the loss of his younger brother. Jamie, after, this is 70 years, after 10 years, I mean, are you really expecting to ever see your brother again? So I wish I could have been there, because this had to just be an amazing yet heartbreaking moment. With, on one hand, you're reunited, on the other, you realize you've missed your entire lives together.
Absolutely. And, I don't know at what point, I'm sure it's different for everybody, but at what point does hope start to slip away? I mean, after, certainly for the first few months, you're hopeful, you're searching every day, but as years turn to decades, I don't know. It's a long game that I don't think anybody is equipped to handle, and they were able to reunite. When we get back from the break, we'll talk more about their reunion, what led to it, and what it means for their lives and the lives of others. The beauty of this reunion, John, would tragically come to some kind of end after just a couple months. 2 months after this reunion took place, Roger passed away. But his family came forward and they believe that not that seeing his brother caused his death, but that allowed him to die happy. He was able to go in peace with himself, knowing that his brother was found. The reunion brought closure to this family that endured decades of pain. Luis had been found alive and well after like nearly 80 years. Most people don't even live long enough for him to have been gone for that long, but he was living a full life away from his family. For Luis, the emotional impact was profound. I can't imagine the overwhelming feeling that you would get from that. John, you and I have talked about this before. I'm an adoptive parent. I'm well aware that one day my children may ask about their births, their birth families, and stories like this really, I don't know, hit hard on me of what that's going to be like, the emotional impact of no matter what the result may be, if and when they make that decision, meeting people that they're related to but have missed their lives is going to be, it's going to be hard, even if it's warming, like it's going to be a big deal. And Luis didn't even know I'm very open with my kids about their adoptions. Luis had no idea. He believed he was raised by his birth parents and he was who he was raised to be.
Yeah, it's so hard, man. I've been to so many conferences over the years where adoptive kids will talk about, they loved their adoptive families and they wouldn't want anything to change, but there's always that lingering question in their minds of who am I and where do I come from?
Right.
And I can't imagine the child that I've raised wanting to go find out something, even if it's not to see if the grass could have been greener, but just, I don't know. I get it. I get it and I don't get it. I understand their desire, but I don't know how it would feel if I were in your shoes.
Yeah, I don't know. I've tried to process that and think about what that's going to do, because it's not them not wanting us when they do it. I think it's a natural curiosity, but it's going to be hard not to feel that way.
I mean, I know so many adoptive adults that are even older than I am, and even if they don't want to know their parents and they realize that this was the best thing for them, they have questions about their medical history because they're getting older and what genetically am I predisposed to? So,
well, how common is this? I know you work in it. DNA testing's come a long way.
Yeah. And this case really highlights just the power of persistence, hope, and of course, the power of new technology. DNA testing has revolutionized the way that cold cases are investigated. And that's not just abductions, but I mean, there's cases in our county that are cold cases from 30 or 40 years ago that are solved because of DNA and I'll say good police work, holding on to evidence for decades when the thought of this kind of DNA testing couldn't have even been a thought your brain would have had. But now because it's been kept in a good, safe location, it's being retested and results are breaking cases wide open.
We hadn't even been to the moon yet. The old Brian Regan sketch of we've been to the moon. Why can't we do things? And you're right. They had no idea. And not only keeping the evidence, but keeping it secure and in a position to where it'll still be able to be tested.
Dude, and this is a hard number that I'm going to give you, but each year there are more than 200,000 children in the United States that are victims to family abduction. This can, and I would hope that this number includes custodial issues where perhaps parents are divorcing and one parent is supposed to have children on X days, but then they keep them a little longer and are turned in and potentially charged for that. Well, I would really hope that number includes that because that's a staggering number.
It does. And I don't know, you think about our interview yesterday with Brandy and what happened in her situation with her ex taking her son for a visit and then he didn't come back alive. Like this 200,000 is just a number I don't think we can comprehend. And that's just in America. They are abducted in a variety of ways. And like you said, it's primarily family abduction. Growing up, we talked about the case of Jacob Wetterling and of Amy Mahalovic in the stranger danger era But now we know that it's rarely strangers that do it. It does happen. There are stranger kidnappings, and that's what happened here to Lewis, but not nearly as often as the other more familiar people abducting and kidnapping happens. In fact, less than 1% of all kidnappings or missing child cases even involve a stranger. So in that 200,000, that's less than 2,000 of those involve a stranger of any way. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reports that around 115 children are victims of stereotypical kidnappings. That's the stranger danger, jumping out from a bush. And those abductions may come from a stranger or just a slight acquaintance. This means the overwhelming majority of cases are conducted by somebody well known to the child. It is often parents, like you mentioned. Sometimes it's other relatives. I've listened to some podcasts recently about family friends kidnapping children, and we used to just think, oh, they're taking this kid because they want them. But with what we know now about sex trafficking, that 200,000 number to me is, I don't know, just, I don't know, makes my bottom of my stomach fall out. But I think this case for Lewis, because of course we see this happen. There are those heartwarming stories we see on TV. We talked about a hospital that had hundreds of babies adopted out, like stolen babies. So this is going to continue to happen. But for Lewis and his family, this was the end of a lifelong search for many of them, and especially Lewis, just getting to meet his family members. And John, I'm sure his parents have passed away, but did it cross your mind that somebody needs to be held accountable for this?
Absolutely. I mean, yes, it's heartwarming that it's solved and that he has been reunited with his family. At the same time, is the person that raised him the perpetrator, or was he adopted out? Was he bought by someone? Like, does the person who raised him even know that this was a stolen, kidnapped kid? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Did they do it? It could be anything in between them doing it or them having no idea.
We've had so many cases in this same time frame. Like, think about the cases we covered in Tennessee and Georgia, where kids were literally abducted from quote unquote unfit mothers and then legally sold.
Yeah.
So is this one of these cases, or did this woman want a child, saw an opportunity, and took Lewis into her home after kidnapping? All that to say, there needs to be more investigation and there needs to be more closure with justice.
Do you interact at all with, like, you deal with families, you primarily deal with adoption, but as a social worker, is there any type of service that you're aware of for families of missing or murdered or endangered kids?
Yeah, that's a good question. And honestly, I'm ashamed to admit, I don't know. I know that hospice does a lot of work with family members who have lost because of death loved ones. And they'll even work, like, if I were to pass away, they would work with my children to help cope and process that loss. But for kidnapped children, I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah. And I doubt that there is, because 200,000 is a big number. We don't have that statistic in front of us of how many of those are recovered, but I would imagine a lot of those endings are not pleasant for the family. And we're starting to see these solved by DNA, and that's awesome. My concern here, John, is a concern I run into at work every day. I work for a software company as my day job. At some point, are we going to become so reliant on technology that we're going to get worse at our other jobs? Do you see that happening with law enforcement? Not like, have you seen it happen, but is that something you anticipate?
Yeah, man, you're asking like some really good questions. I really don't know. So I'm going to just turn it around on you and ask you the same question.
Yeah, I'm afraid it will. I think we often talk about the importance of blocking off a crime scene. I worry that now if there's a weapon there, be like, oh, we don't need to do anything. There's going to be DNA, not Dion coaches Colorado. We talked about that last Friday. there's going to be DNA on that. We need to, all we need to do is test it and we'll figure it out. I'm really hopeful that's not the case, because I think the best police work includes all the comprehensive boots on the ground, taking thorough measures and everything, and also using the technology. So I'm sure it will happen to some degree, just hopefully not in ways that will result in cases going unsolved or people not being found.
Let me ask you another technology question. All right. 30 years ago, and certainly 70 years ago, when this case originally opened, this kind of technology wasn't even fathomable, if that's a word.
Yeah.
So what technology could exist 40 or 50 years from now that police need to continue to be thorough in gathering information and gathering evidence so that it can be used to help solve crimes 50 years from now? Like, are we the furthest technologically that we can go, or is there even more that will surprise us in several more years?
So I'd actually been thinking about this. I don't know that there's information we can gather now that will pay off later, but I start thinking about the fact that we have cameras with us at all times. We have cameras on every street corner, and we have police officers that wear what? They wear body cams.
Right.
And that's a very prevalent, very easy way to track what's happening. I would not be shocked if we end up in a place where the majority of people have some kind of camera, whether it is in a shirt pocket, on a button, in their glasses, that record what's happening during the day. So we're going to have video of so many different things. And then we're going to have issues with video tampering, deep fakes, destroying recording devices. But I see that being kind of a way of the future as we get into more augmented reality stuff.
I don't want to seem scattered, but what you were talking about makes me think of a case that's very, I don't know, in the front of people's minds right now out of Kentucky. There was a judge in eastern Kentucky, Letcher County, that was shot and killed by the county sheriff in his chambers. There is video footage of the sheriff in the judge's chambers shooting the judge. And there's not been an arraignment yet because the case is still kind of working its way through the system, although the sheriff has been arrested. So there's video proof that this happened. I think the only way this works out in trial is there any, like, what was the motive? And does it even matter? You murdered a man. Does it matter how shady the judge may or may not have been? Like, so yeah, I think in that case, regardless of the situation around the crime, you murdered a man, you're on video murdering the man. It wasn't in self-defense. You're screwed.
Having watched his pretrial hearing, I do have some clarification on that question, actually. The difference between murder and manslaughter, at least in Kentucky law, is that manslaughter includes some type of emotional reaction by the perpetrator. So if there is some kind of provocation, they get really upset and act before they calm down, that is justification potentially. Now, the defense has to prove that there was provocation, there was high emotion, and it was immediate, that it should be dropped to manslaughter. I think that
could very well be the case here then.
I think that's the route the defense is going to go. I covered that on TikTok last week. I think it's because I didn't know the question, and the defense attorney talked about it some, so I went and did some research, and it's pretty fascinating. But you're right. So how can we measure intentions? I hope we're not going like Neuralink route and recording our thoughts. I don't want to get there. We're all worried about privacy. I don't think that's going to help, let alone even the cameras that I mentioned being attached to everybody.
So let's go back to missing children, because we've kind of just opened the floodgates and all kinds of cases are coming in.
It's all relative.
I mean, when I was growing up, do you remember, like, people talk about seeing your face on a milk carton? Well, that wasn't my era, but I do remember going into the post office, going into Walmart, and there were posters up for missing children. So
yep.
Does that still exist today? And if so, in what capacity?
I've seen it in Walmart recently. And actually, we have another case on our desk we haven't talked about yet, about a guy who went missing in Hawaii and then found out as an adult recently, went on a missing children's website and found himself. So I think the online piece makes that makes that helpful, makes that available for people to recognize it, and it's more accessible, but it's not in your face. It's not on your milk carton when you're drinking your milk. It's not, I don't know, I never go to the post office anyway, but it's not at the post office. I have seen those posters recently in shopping centers, so that's great, but it's kind of the problem with the internet, right? Like you have access to everything, but nothing is in your face.
So I'm friends with people on like social media, specifically Facebook, and they'll all the time repost like this person's missing, help us. And I guess it's awful to admit, but I'm really skeptical. Like, is this just fake news? Is this from 15 years ago and it's fake and people are just reposting it because I don't know. But I guess when you hear that there are over 200,000 child abductions in America every year, you might want to just pay closer attention to some of those things like that are in your face, like Facebook posts or the flyers that you see in public, like at Walmart and stuff, because this is a problem. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. So with that all being said, like what could we as society do to make sure that this doesn't happen on a more frequent scale?
I mean, that's the impossible question as a parent, right? Finding the balance between protecting your kids and letting them grow up. I would love to keep my kids in my eyesight at all times so I can know that they are safe, but they're going to get out there. They're going to start driving. You can have apps on your phones to track them, but who's to say they're not going to leave their phone somewhere? You can have them check in via text. You can have direct messaging, whatever it may be, but it's still possible to get around that technology. And then what else is out there? My wife and I were discussing yesterday that she has an app that alerts her when somebody off of the sex registry shows up in our area. And she was showing me like, hey, I got this notification. I saw this guy today. Like it's, and just
is
to
that
know
like a
that
geofencing thing? Like, cause you're not talking about someone like that moved in on the street and now they're registered to this street and we have access to see that. You're talking about they were in close enough proximity that your wife has access to see that.
I think it's moving into the area.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's intriguing.
Yeah. So it within a certain zip code, it will alert you. So how can I balance letting my kids live a life and making sure they're protected? And everybody does it differently. Some people are hyper vigilant. You're not allowed to do anything ever. Like I know a lot of kids like that, and those kids are safe. Other people are like, when I was a kid, like you and I were, John, you go out and you play in the woods all day and your parents don't even care what you're doing as long as it's not illegal or, well, even if it is illegal, as long as you don't get caught, as long as you come home for dinner.
What they didn't know wouldn't hurt them.
So I don't know what that balance is. I think it does start in the home and with parenting and with taking advantage of the technologies like the alerts for people that are moving into the neighborhood.
I'm certainly okay. Like if you are paroled and you're a sex offender or you're someone who's hurt someone in the past, put some kind of sensor inside of their body and make it accessible to the public so that if they're out and about and we have questions like, were you around here? Let me pull this system up. Yeah, you were. You got some explaining to do.
Yeah.
That's probably so ethically not okay, but I'm okay with it.
Yeah. I mean, we're the lines between ethics and privacy or freedom and privacy in America is a very tight one right now. And I think this plays into that. I don't know anything that would have stopped Lewis from being kidnapped when he was, unless it was just being hand in hand with the parents. But nowadays with all the cameras, with all the alerts, with things that are available, I think it's easier to track what's happening. But it also means that the perpetrators are getting more creative in using their access. So I would like to say things are getting better, but obviously 200,000 isn't a number any of us should be comfortable with. Very thankful that Lewis found his family. He is still living. Like I said, Roger passed away, but he has a new family to connect with, and that family has some answers. So hoping that happens for other families, hoping technology continues to serve us well and not serve the evil people. But this was a heartwarming story that we certainly wanted to tell.
Yep. Jamie, thank you for talking about this story with me. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you would like more content that you have not listened to yet, make sure that you check out patreon.com. We release our regular episodes early and ad-free, but then you also get a bonus episode on the first day of every month. So there's like 6 years worth of bonus episodes over there for as little as $3 a month.
If you're on TikTok or Instagram, follow us over there. I mean, the comments are so entertaining. People are wild, and it's been insane to keep up with. So just want the entertainment value of seeing crazy people say crazy things, then come follow us on social media.
All right, guys. Until next crime, this has been True Crimecast.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.